With JoJoLands being only 2 weeks away, maybe even less at the time that this video actually goes out, there's a lot that I want to talk about. What I want to do first is make a sort of compilation / retrospective on all my videos I did on JoJolion, with some added commentary at the end of each video, if you haven't seen them or want to watch them all in one go, like a sort of long-term video. I know that's a huge thing on YouTube, so I thought why not put them all together and add some more commentary for people who might have seen them before. I'm going to have my 4 videos I've done on JoJolion, my initial thoughts on the ending, the Tooru video that everyone absolutely hates, my thoughts on JOBIN, and my thoughts on Yasuho. At the end, I'm going to add some more thoughts with a full retrospective, since I read the part entirely for this video. Now I am going to give you a heads up, these videos are pretty old, you know, they were really early on in my YouTube journey, so they're kind of crusty and not up to the standards of what I would put out in a modern video. But with this being a retrospective, I'm not just going to remake the videos, I'm going to show you what it's like in the time I made it with my mindset at that time, because that is part of the entire experience I had with this part. So you might think it's crusty, and that's valid. If you don't want to watch it, you can just skip to my retrospective thoughts after each video. And if you enjoy any of this stuff or have seen some videos, look at the timestamps down below if you want to skip them or just get to some new content. With that, hopefully you enjoy. JoJolion was the first ever long-running manga that I read for a really long time. I've been reading this series ever since I was in high school, which at this point would be around 5 to 6 years of my life I've been following this story. And I just finished the final chapter of JoJolion, finishing my half a decade long journey reading this story. And I just really wanted to get my thoughts out about this topic because I'm a really big fan of JoJo's, and I just wanted to sort of appreciate the story even though I wasn't the biggest fan of it all the way through. So I just wanted to get my thoughts out about the story as it stands in my head immediately after finishing it. So hopefully you enjoy my thoughts, because I've been really wanting to make this video ever since I learned that JoJolion was ending rather soon. So hopefully you enjoy. To start, I just wanted to focus on some specific aspects of the story that I personally was never the biggest fan of, and I think going from there I'll talk about what I liked about how Araki ended the story and basically what I thought of the part as a whole. So I just wanted to focus first on the character of Josuke. I always thought he had a really interesting ability and a premise that I was relatively interested in, because he had such a great conflict with many other people in the part, specifically with JOBIN. Josuke's entire motivation and JOBIN's motivation directly contrast one another, where Josuke's trying to find out the truth using this fruit, and JOBIN is just trying to ensure that the family can have enough money selling this fruit, doing whatever means necessary. It made it feel as though there was a great deal of contrast between the two, which is why I always assumed, ever since the story was really building up, that JOBIN would be the main confrontation that Josuke would have to face in order for him to truly figure out who he is and what he was. Now, Araki obviously took that in a very different way when the latter half of the story was being built up with the head doctor, but personally, the head doctor wasn't the worst it could have been. I did think it was pretty compelling with this massive sense of mystery, very similar to part 4, which of course it's very similar since this is meant to be the alternate version of that story. And I thought having the head doctor be this head of this massive organization, in contrast to a lone serial killer, was also a neat touch. However, I really just wanted to point out that my opinions on the latter half of the story are very, very low, in my opinion. I feel as though many of the arcs don't actually move the story along in a satisfying way, and it's all just stepping stones leading to the head doctor, who, personally, I was never that invested in because we were not introduced to his character at an earlier point in the story. I feel as though if this character was alluded to, or even mentioned earlier on in the story, like he is assumedly shown at the end, where he's been a looming force ever present in Yasuo's life and many other characters' lives, I feel as though I would have had a great sense of shock and really strong attachment to this character. But at the end of the story, I felt as though the connection was forced, and personally, I would have preferred if JOBIN, someone we've known since the beginning of the story, was the main villain. But obviously, Araki went a different way, and I'm not totally against it. It's just not something I personally enjoyed, because it felt like a rather stark contrast and a rather abrupt, oh, this is the main villain? Personally, when Tooru was first introduced, I didn't even know he would be the main villain. I thought he was going to be the main build-up to the main villain, not him being the main villain himself, because of his abrupt introduction. So those are my thoughts on Tooru and the main villain debate slash controversy that I have with this story. The next thing I would like to discuss is the sort of Deus Ex Machina-esque ability that Josuke was able to develop at the end. I felt like that was very, very forced and very annoying, because like I said early on, the main thing I liked about Josuke was his ability to take something away from anyone. It could be their friction, their eyesight, their memories. I thought it was an incredibly interesting ability and had a ton of potential, especially in action. Now, having that ability basically go unused in the final section of the story with the big bad villain, I felt like just was a very big disappointment. I don't know how else to say it. I feel like Araki wrote an ability with a ton of variation and uniqueness to it that literally he could have done anything with, but to have the reveal of, oh, your ability that you've known this entire part was not that ability, personally, I felt was annoying. I'm just going to be straight up. I thought it was kind of annoying because there were just so many aspects of that ability that I found compelling, especially when used in many unique ways, like I said, and just to have it revealed to be something completely different and be essentially a Golden Experience Requiem type moment, I thought was disappointing, because I feel like that ability was really well utilized, and many previous parts have had characters use their abilities in unique ways as it has continued onward. Specifically, I was going to bring up Josuke Part 4, because I feel as though him learning to shoot projectiles and sort of bring them back using Crazy Diamond was a really unique way to build up his ability, and I don't know. I feel as though having Josuke Part 8 have some realization like that, not having it be, oh, it's actually a different ability altogether, would have been more satisfying, in my opinion. I have a few other things I would like to bring up before talking about the actual end of the part, and two of them are related to the characters Josuke is kind of in this journey with. The first I would like to bring up is Yasuho. I really enjoyed Yasuho as a character early on in the story, but throughout the latter half, it felt as though every single time she was in danger and she was going to die. I cannot even remember the amount of times that Araki has basically put Yasuho in a death scenario, and I just genuinely did not care because I was so used to seeing her in the worst circumstances ever and coming out totally fine. It almost felt as though Araki, who is known for his really gory and gruesome death scenes that really are supposed to hit, was being really kind of schlocky. And honestly, close relation to this channel, very much like Oda is in regards to death. I feel as though Oda does the same kind of thing where he teases at a death and tries to make it seem really emotionally impactful for the reader, but when it's revealed they don't actually die, it takes away a lot of that emotion, makes it feel cheap. And Yasuho having many moments of that happening felt cheap, in my opinion. Now, the last thing I'm going to bring up in the negatives was my overall impression that the Higashikata family, who was built up very early on to be these important characters in the story, were not really that important in the long run. I felt as though many of them were basically pushed to the side, specifically Hato and Daya. They were basically irrelevant, I would say, throughout a major portion of the story, only being used to either be an antagonist early on or bring other characters into the story through relation to them. They themselves, I felt, didn't have much impact in the story whatsoever. But bouncing off of that specific point of family, I would say that Araki has some really good themes going on in this part, specifically with the concept of identity and family. Now, I wanted to focus on family first since I literally just brought it up, and I would say that the strong connections and bonds that the characters share are pretty endearing throughout the entirety of the story, even though I feel as many of the characters don't get as much screen time as they deserve. You could definitely tell that there's some strong connection shown when they're on screen together, and Josuke's entire motivation throughout much of the story is to ensure that the safety of his past selves' families are entirely fine. But something I did want to bring up that I think is rather peculiar is the end chapter. So I'm going to finally be talking about the final chapter of JoJolion. So if you haven't read it, make sure to read it now and come back to this video once you're finished. Alright? So, we get to see, after defeating Tooru, the head doctor, everyone's fine, everyone's good, we get to see that Josuke is at the hospital still, since he just defeated him right there, and we see Josefumi's mother in the hospital parking lot. And this is a big deal in the grand scheme of things, because this is someone we are supposed to care about, since Josuke should care about them, but Josuke doesn't care about them, which I think is a really strange choice, because Josuke, someone whose entire motivation was to ensure the safety of Holly-san and make sure that she is okay and that she is able to basically function again as a normal human being, sees Josefumi's mother in the parking lot and she's fine. She didn't really notice anything peculiar about Josuke, and I think this is really odd, personally. I feel as though having Josuke become this sort of new person is a great thing. I think it's a really great thing that he's finally able to be accepting of himself, but it feels kind of weird that he almost felt apathetic to seeing her. But that's just me, obviously. Many people could have interpreted that in a different way, but I felt as though that moment was very out of character for Josuke, since he's shown such a connection to ensuring Holly-san's safety. Now, the end of the story, which shows that Josuke and Yasuho are hanging out with the Higashikata family, showing that many of them are okay, which is, expected for the story. It shows that they are trying to really just cope with all the tragedy that has happened around them thanks to Tooru, and I think it's pretty compelling, I'm not gonna lie. You can clearly tell that some damage has been done on the family, and they're really shaken up about it because of the loss of JOBIN and Norisuke's immense pain that he went through. Personally, I was kind of shocked that Norisuke came out alive at all. So, personally, seeing that this family is just so broken, and the way that they cope is to finally accept Josuke into the family, I felt was really a nice moment. Because Josuke, he's been searching for this family throughout the entire story, and having him, at the end, finally be accepted into the family, I felt was a pretty good way of ending the story. And something I also quite enjoyed, but did not expect whatsoever, was the true end of the story, which is when Yasuho, instead of staying with the family, just leaves. I thought it was actually really kind of interesting, because Araki has been building up this story to have a strong connection between Josuke and Yasuho, showing that there's a strong connection between them. They've been sort of deemed as like this pairing throughout the entire story, And I think it's a really neat bookend that Yasuho brings Josuke to this family, and when Josuke is finally accepted into this family, she leaves. I thought that was pretty interesting and personally very unexpected. But what do I think about part 8 as a whole? Personally, I felt there were many moments and characters underutilized in the story. The main villain was very lackluster compared to other JoJo villains, and the main characters I did not develop much of an attachment for. And that sounds incredibly negative, but I really did enjoy it. I know how crazy that must seem, but I did really enjoy it. I didn't even mention the fights in the latter half that all felt very, 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 very similar, and was a grind on a monthly schedule. Yet, somehow, I still enjoyed this. And it's not just because it was JoJo's, it's because there were characters that I really cared about. I was invested in the characters. There were some characters I felt definitely got some screen time that were not as developed, or Araki wrote them in a way that I stopped caring about them. Specifically, Yasuho with her constant death flags. That was horrible. That was so horrible. But there were so many aspects of the story that I enjoyed. Specifically, JOBIN, Tsurugi, Kato, Norisuke, Josuke's initial motivation to save Holly. There were just a lot of great moments in the story, and I really liked the early half of the story, specifically the beginning to Damo Tamaki, which is the parts that I did not read monthly. I basically caught up to them instantaneously. Essentially, as soon as I started reading it monthly, it felt like a grind, like a slog almost. So my experience reading it monthly definitely has shaped my view on the part, but I feel as though there are some moments, specifically Yasuo's death flags, that would have bothered me just as much, or maybe even more, if I was reading this binging all the way through. But yeah, JoJolion really was a journey. I want to give this ending some more time to soak in, and let me really sort of explore the story now that it's fully completed. Now, there's a lot of stuff in this video that I don't necessarily agree with as much as I did when this came out. For example, the stuff with Yasuho, you're even going to see it in this video. I made a whole video about how much I love Yasuho, so clearly some of that changed. But a lot of my stuff that I do talk about in here is pretty similar. Like, I gotta be honest, I do personally think that Josuke learning the spin in the final few chapters of the part was completely ridiculous. I also am not a huge fan of Tooru, which you're gonna see for, I don't know, a half an hour. And the thing I want to bring up, most importantly, is my thoughts on Josuke not talking to Josufumi's mom. At first, I was really annoyed by this, seeing that Josuke cared so much for Holly-san, I wanted to protect her the entirety of the part, but not really caring about Josufumi's mom. I think that him avoiding Josufumi's mom actually shows that he is no longer just trying to search for his past or something to rely on, because he's finally realized that he is, himself. He's not Josefumi, he's not Kira, he's Josuke. And he's actually developed this sense of individuality that he's been searching for, this comfort, this family, the support that he's been longing for. And so him not really talking to Josufumi's mom, honestly, I kind of like it. I kind of like it at this point. So my thoughts on that have completely changed, but the ending as a whole, I think, is good. I do think the ability is a Deus Ex Machina. I'm not a huge fan of it. I do think Josuke having this self-actualization was really great. Him actually joining the HIGASHIKATA family was really great as well. But one thing I do want to bring up before I move on to the Tooru video is the thing with Yasuho leaving the family at the end of the part. I feel like this is a very interesting thing that Araki did here, because Yasuho was introduced at the start of the entire story, obviously. She brings Josuke to the family, and then Josuke is welcomed in, and then she leaves. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. But there was a whole thing around the beginning of the story where Yasuho was welcomed into the family picture. And I thought, okay, that would have been nice if she stuck around. I'm a bit conflicted on that. There was a comment I got really recently, I think like a day ago, or maybe two. And someone brought up the idea of Yasuho possibly abandoning and leaving the family, which kind of reflects how her family kind of is, with her mom being very absent in her life, and I thought that was really interesting. But overall, I do think the ending of JoJolion is really good, with Josuke being welcomed to the family, having the family sort of come together in this time of tragedy, and change to a time of hope, with Tsurugi now having been cured from the rock disease, and although some characters died, rest in peace to my guy JOBIN, we got some nice hope to come, with Josuke now being welcomed to the family. And I'm excited to see if Josuke or Yasuho or any characters from JoJolion actually do end up showing up in part 9, especially because of the ambiguity of this ending and the hopeful optimism it provides. Maybe we'll get to see them in the future. Now we're going to get into the Tooru video, the former most popular video on my channel for over a year. So I assume if you are on this channel, you might have seen that video before. So remember, you could skip to the timestamp down below if you have already seen it. But if you are ready to hear me slander Tooru for around half an hour, get ready, because a lot of people have clearly had some negative thoughts on that, and I'll give my thoughts on that after the video. So, hope you enjoy. After finishing up my thoughts on JoJolion, I really wanted to continue talking about Tooru, because I feel as though Tooru is by far the thing that JoJolion fumbled the most, because I felt as though, literally still reading the part, chapters like 107, 108, I still thought we weren't at the main villain. And there's only 110 chapters, so that's a bit sad to think about in retrospect. Overall, what I really want to talk about is what I feel are Tooru's two main things that detract from him being a good JoJo villain. Personally, I would consider him the worst JoJo villain, without a doubt, because of these two aspects in the story. Obviously, this is going to contain heavy spoilers for the rest of JoJolion, since he's literally the end game villain. So if you haven't read it, read it, come back, or if you don't care, just continue watching so you can hear me ramble about why I don't like this guy that much. So the first thing I want to bring up is his introduction into the story, because I feel as though trying to make the villain very anonymous was a good idea, and it felt very similar to things like Diavolo in part 5, where he's the head of this big organization. But the problem with this is we have not been considering the head of this organization until like halfway through the story. Diavolo was a named person who was introduced to us very early on through literally Giorno's first ever fight with Bruno. And I'm just comparing this to part 5 because I feel as though JoJolion's concept of the head of a large organization is very similar to Diavolo being the head of a large mafia organization. The idea of who the head doctor is and trying to figure out who this character actually is was what drove me to get really invested around the end game of JoJolion, and I thought it was genuinely really interesting. But something I do want to bring up is that the head doctor, we knew who they were as a concept, but we never really got to know who they are as a character. And obviously the head doctor itself was just Tooru's stand and sort of a front that allowed him to get whatever he wanted, but it felt as though, same goes with Tooru obviously, we never really got to know who Tooru is, his motivations entirely, and I can understand why Araki chose to write them this way, but I'll get into that later. The amount of anticipation that the head doctor had throughout the entirety of the latter half of the story was pretty high, because ever since Urban Gorilla, way back when Mamazuku was first introduced, which is kind of crazy to think about, says, just wait till you get a load of our boss, essentially, because it just felt as though it was really leading up to something. But personally, I think it would have been better if that something we were leading up to was more similar to Dio in part 3 or Diavolo in part 5, where we know who they are throughout the entirety of the story. This is the person we've been looking forward to this entire time. But I get that Araki wanted to put this person in the shadows to put more highlight on Josuke, which is something I understand, but it's just not something personally I thought was compelling for the main villain of the story. Now, I want to go more into the way Tooru was introduced into the story, because Tooru was basically introduced at the end game when we were at the TG University Hospital. We were basically about to
confront the head doctor, and he was just plopped into the scene. You know what I mean? It feels as though Araki introduced this character out of nowhere. So he was almost the red herring, which is why I believed, literally while he was getting defeated, there's still something bigger. Something crazier has to happen. And even though his ability, being the Wonder Review, the head doctor, what we've been building up this whole time, I still felt that he was a red herring because of the way he was introduced into the story in such a casual, nonchalant sort of manner. The thing that we cared about the head doctor, which is very similar to Diavolo, because Diavolo is introduced with his ability. His ability, King Crimson. The head doctor was introduced with this weird, every time you try to pursue it, you will just get attacked nonchalantly, which led to the idea of Josuke having to invite Tooru to attack him and sort of take him out. And it was a very, very weird dynamic that felt very similar as a sort of contrast to how JoJolion was progressing at that point, because many of the fights in JoJolion were long-ranged, distance automatic stands, which is just running around, trying to figure out a way to attack them, and not being able to do anything, essentially. Now, Tooru's stand, which is, you can't even think about it. You can't even think of running away from it. You can't think about attacking it. If you think about attacking it, or in the case of Mitsuba literally staring at the head doctor outside, she literally started cutting off her own hands unknowingly just because she saw the head doctor. It feels as though this stand's ability is so broken that it just feels as though if you even think about it existing in any way whatsoever, or even notice it existing in any way, you will get damaged. So it feels as though it's meant to be this invincible sort of wall that has no entire just negativity around it at all. Everything else around stands and main villains usually have a character problem. Let's talk about Dio for part 3, for example. Dio's stand is super broken. He can stop time, you know, we all know this. But Dio's hubris, his pride, is what kills him, and that makes a convincing reason for him to be defeated, even though bad leg, haha, you know. But Tooru, we don't even know Toru's character really whatsoever. We have no concept of who Tooru is as a person, his motivations. He wants the new Rokakaka. Why? Because it's better. But why really? To make money? We don't know really. That's just something that is never really fully explained. His real motivations as a character, why he does the thing he does. And the thing that makes it so odd is the way he was introduced as this sort of red herring, which we all assumed maybe he could be important. But the way he was introduced was as Yasuo's boyfriend. And the more we learn about Tooru, why did he ever do this? It doesn't really seem to make any sense in the narrative why he would go after Yasuo at all, because he's been following her ever since she was a child, and now they dated in high school and they're like ex-lovers or something. And this is obviously a spoiler thing, so I'm talking about the final chapter. Tooru is shown in the flashback with Lucy and Joseph, and it's just, why was he there? I get it. They did that to show that he had the Rokakaka in the present time and that he wanted the new one. He shows some interest in this in the past, so there's some connection in the future. And it's also meant to show that the Joestar family is meant to stop the rock humans, Tooru. But what is his motivation? We have no real concept of why he's doing the thing he does, and that's what's so frustrating about it, because with every other villain in JoJo, I would say, there is some form of motivation and idea as to why the characters do what they do. But with Tooru, he's meant to be a sort of blank slate, and this is what I've been considering and has been annoying me quite a bit, is Araki's concept of this blank slate rock human thing. The rock humans are meant to be non-changing, they never change, which is why Tooru has looked the exact same. All the rock humans look the exact same ever since they were introduced into the story or in the past. They all look the same. But for Tooru, I think it's meant more to be, he doesn't need to have a motivation. He'll never change. But Josuke, he'll change. And it's meant to be a sort of parallel. In the final chapter of JoJolion, Joseph actually says, this rock animal guardrail thing, it's the most hard and dry thing I've ever seen, which is meant to obviously be a contrast to soft and wet, Josuke, rock human contrast. But all of these sort of elements feel rather forced in my opinion, because I would rather have the characters have a direct contrast with one another over the idea of them themselves. Now, the last thing that I want to bring up is something I feel really is a tragedy, which is the lack of a dynamic between Josuke and Tooru. It is abysmal, personally. That contrast, when that contrast is so good, it's fantastic. It's fantastic in my opinion. That's why Dio is such a great villain. That's why Kira is such a great villain. That's why Funny Valentine is such a great villain. All of these characters have such a closely in tune contrast with the protagonist. It's fantastic. I love it. That's why I really appreciate villains in JoJo, because they're meant to show the contrast of the main character in many different ways, not just their abilities, but their personality, their worldview, their entire role in society. I think it's really interesting. And the fact that Tooru is meant to be this nobody is a bit annoying. Now, I do see that obviously there is some form of contrast with their interest in the Rokakaka, where it's sort of like how I described in my original JoJolion video, where JOBIN was sort of the contrast with Josuke on that. Tooru also has some sort of contrast. Tooru and Josuke seem to have some romantic involvement with Yasuho, but there's obviously some romantic tension, quote unquote, which is probably why he was first introduced as that, to sort of be like, oh, that's odd. I wonder why he did that. And they're both after the Rokakaka. Tooru, being the head doctor, is trying to make sure that the Rokakaka can be sold for billions and billions and billions and make a ton of money, and so the rock humans can be rich forever. But again, why? This motivation feels very basic in my opinion, and as though it personally doesn't add anything to the rock human lore or anything about Tooru himself that would make him more interesting. He's more just a stepping stone, pun intended, of the rock humans getting higher up in society and the humans getting lower. And I guess this is meant to be symbolic of like society, and how the rock humans are the ones who are the most shallow and the least dynamic, and the least themselves are the ones who advance in society, and those who try to change don't. They kind of struggle in society. Like, I get it. Is it meant to be some heady thing? Probably, but for me, it's just not interesting, I would say. That's at least the way I interpreted a lot of it. It felt as though it was just a heady concept, and I get it. It is nice that Josuke is becoming this more open person, and I love seeing him actually feel confident in himself. I thought that was a really great way to end the story, but that being the contrast between the two feels as though it's very baseline, you know? It just feels as though Josuke and Tooru should have a lot more contrast with one another, and genuinely Tooru should have been built up as this sort of, if they were going to go that role of he's Yasuo's ex-boyfriend and Josuke is to watch out for that guy, you know, if they did something along that line, I would feel as though it makes sense that Tooru would always have that negative sort of attribute to him, and then his reveal as the head doctor and the main villain would have been pretty interesting in my opinion. But I don't know, I feel as though that's just one way it could have been, you know, altered to make it seem as though Tooru is more of an ever-present force in the story. Realistically, he has been ever-present in the story, so seeing him be revealed as a rock human and be revealed as the head doctor and be always in the past and never really changing ever, it would sort of make sense in my opinion. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Tooru. I know I was incredibly negative for a lot of this, but I feel as though he was definitely one of the weakest parts of Part 8, without a doubt. Because if he was developed in a good, reasonable way, then I could see me actually sort of liking him. But there's just so many blanks about Tooru that we just don't know, and it makes him rather uninteresting. And I think it's kind of ironic that many of the most basic villains in JoJo only have one name, Diavolo, one name. Cars, who is meant to be basic, one name. And now Tooru, one name. Those are my thoughts on Tooru. Let me know what you think of him, because obviously I am very negative towards Tooru, and I don't really have a high opinion of him as a character or the concept behind him. I think he's rather but if he was written a bit different, he might have more potential in my opinion. So curious what you all think. If you're curious about anything JoJo related of part 8, just send questions below. Obviously I would love to just ramble and talk about the end of this now that the entire community is in a part 8 fever now that it's finally over. I just want to get more in tune, you know. Hope you enjoyed. I feel as though I'm gonna get flamed for this. I don't know how many people like Tooru, in my opinion. I don't really know. I haven't really seen much consensus on positives towards him, so just hoping, you know, this doesn't get blown up in my face.
It did. As someone who is a really fledgling content creator, adamant JoJo fan, and someone who literally just finished the part less than an hour before starting to record my thoughts on Tooru, which was a very spur-of-the-moment video, obviously, because it was a spur-of-the-moment thing. That video went absolutely crazy. It had thousands and thousands of views, something I never expected, because at the time I think I had like 200 or less subscribers. And now, seeing that this video is going crazy, lots of people are commenting, saying I'm a moron, or just agreeing with me completely, I thought it was incredibly fascinating. Seeing that the fan base was as conflicted on this character as I was, and while, again, I was a lot more negative, seeing these people who were really positive and appreciative of Tooru was really fascinating, genuinely. Although I don't agree with a lot of the positive comments and I give my feedback in the comments, I thought they were really interesting. But it didn't really change my opinion on his role in the story and the way he was introduced into the story. And now, even to this day, you know, I love reading the comments and I love having these conversations. And if I could somehow have some opportunity to make a fandom become more connected and more interactive, that's something I would love to do. If you even look through the comments of the video, you'll even see some like pretty big JoJo people in there, which is just crazy. Like, I saw Metas was in there, X-Forts is in there. Like, it's just insane that people who have like these pretty large communities around them have somehow stumbled across this video. And I remember Metas literally just comments like, yeah. And I'm just like, what do you mean, yeah? And then I check the channel and there's this like Tooru epic thesis about how amazing they are. So I just thought that was super hilarious. Knowing that I'm able to just bring the community together somehow, that was just super sick. And that made me really inspired to try and make more content once I got over the hurdle that most people thought my opinions were absolute trash. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the people who thought I was some power scaling guy and always assumed that I thought Tooru was like a weak character because they weren't that strong, but like Wonder of You is so busted, and it's just, I don't know. I don't know how they thought I was thinking some power scaling stuff. Like, this character has been such a lingering field over my head for the past year plus now, that literally if you go on Google image search right now and look up just the word Tooru, my video will be in the top image searches for this character. I don't know how to even describe it. Like, if you even look up Tooru JoJo, my name is like associated with it, and it's like, it's crazy. It's like actually crazy. I guess I'm glad that I'm associated with this character. You know, I'll be able to provide some insight as to why I don't think he's that great, because a lot of people obviously love this character, but it's just really bizarre because, like, pun not intended, but like genuinely, I feel like I don't know how long it's gonna be, obviously, but the video's been out for over a year, almost a year and a half now, and it's still there. Like, this is not like a recent like video that's just there because it's there. It's still there after a year and a half, and it's just like, it's just wild to think like maybe it'll still be there in like a year or 2 years, and it's just like, am I really just gonna be that guy? Am I just the Tooru hate guy? It's wild to think about. It's wild. Also, something just that I think is absolutely hysterical is that at the time of me editing this video, I got all the audio done, everything's done. I'm looking through my YouTube subscriptions and I'm seeing X-Forts literally just dropped his entire JoJolion look back type video, and I'm just like, wow, that is too crazy of a coincidence. But make sure to watch that. This is apparently going to be a 2-part thing. He did the first half in this video, and I just know that second half video is going to be absolutely unreal. So definitely watch that. And at the same point, make sure to sub to Metas as well. I shouted him out literally earlier in this section as well. He's almost at 100k, so let's hope that any traction from this video could help him, because we try to build the community up. But yeah, those are really all my thoughts on Tooru. So now, with that all out of the way, let's hop right into the JOBIN video, where I talk about how much I love JOBIN as a character, how I think Araki just made a masterful rival character to Josuke, and a lot of other stuff. I'm not going to tell you everything, obviously, but just know that I think JOBIN is an absolute masterwork of Araki's character writing, and hopefully you see why I like him so much.
There's so many aspects of this character that I just like adore every second of, and I just really wanted to highlight what I felt was the best character in JoJolion and really go into detail as to why I liked him so much and why my expectations for him were really, really high. And well, I thought it paid off for a lot of it. Still wished he was the main villain, but it didn't go that way. But he was still my favorite character in the part by quite a long shot. So I'm gonna go basically from his first introduction in the Beetle Tendency, Every Day's a Summer Vacation arc, all the way up to his end in the story. So hopefully you enjoy and understand my thought process as to why I like him so much. Thank you all a lot for being so supportive of the videos. It really means a ton, and hopefully you enjoyed this one as well. So what better place to start than with JOBIN's introduction, which I think says a lot about how his character is written from this point in the story onward, because we're supposed to trust the HIGASHIKATA family from this point on. There's some mystery around them, but they're basically the base that Josuke is allowed to stay with. He created these bonds with many of the family members. Obviously, we're supposed to trust these characters, even though there was that mystery around who they were, why they took care of him at the start. We're supposed to really, feel comfortable around these characters at this point in the story. But then JOBIN enters the scene, and there's this weird sense of mystery around him, because not only was he gone for such a long time, he has some ties to the Rokakaka itself, and he gets a really strange sort of introduction with Josuke, where there's sort of this weird tension, because out of all things, spilling a parfait on his shoe just really gave a bad impression, gave him the, oh, I think I know you, who are you again, sort of moment. But obviously, since he was gone for such a long period in time, he probably would have forgot, genuinely. And what I think is so interesting about this moment is we get that sort of weird apprehension to try to know him until later on, literally in the next few chapters, where Josuke tries to get to know JOBIN for his interest, which we also get to see in his introduction. We get to see there's this weird apprehension to know Josuke because, why does he need to? But also that JOBIN's a bit of a nerd, and I kind of love that, because he's just kind of like, he has this neat little character quirks. Like, he really likes Item Mitsuo poetry, and he really likes Beatles, and he's just very carefree and lax about that kind of stuff. He's a bit of a spender, obviously, because the HIGASHIKATA family's rich, so he has this insane Lamborghini he drives around. He definitely shows the wealth of the HIGASHIKATA family a lot, which is very fitting since he's supposed to be the rightful heir, and he's the one making a ton of the decisions for the fruit parlor. So I think that also is a good connection to his role in the story as well. So the next thing I wanted to cover was JOBIN's basically introduction arc, which is called Every Day is Like Summer Vacation, or to the fan base, Beetle Tendency, which I think after rereading, wow, I cannot believe how much I enjoyed this on the reread, because it's not really, like, obviously the Beetle battle is there, but it's really a weird kind of mental battle, and it's very, very compelling. I actually would highly recommend you reread it if you haven't, because, oh my god, I enjoyed that way more than I thought I would. Like, I can't even, it's just crazy. But anyway, enough gushing about that arc for the moment. What is so interesting about it that is not the Beetle stuff is how it's like a mental warfare between Josuke and JOBIN. Josuke is trying to learn JOBIN's stand ability, what he was doing, if JOBIN possibly knows who Josuke is, because JOBIN has had ties to the rock humans, which is what makes him such a fascinating sort of threat, because JOBIN, we don't know what side he's really on, and that's what I think makes him so compelling. He's a very gray character. We don't know if he's for the Higashikata family, because, you know, he's working with the rock humans, and the rock humans know all this negative stuff about Josuke's past, and it's just like, what side are you on? Are you an enemy or are you an ally? And I think that's what makes him so fascinating, and specifically with the way he conveys himself through this beetle fight, which is so, I can't believe I'm saying that, but it really is a ton. It really shows so much of his character. It shows that he is a very manipulative person, and I think it's so fascinating. He's very calm, he's very cool, he's very collected, but if he gets very heated about his passions, he is willing to let some information slip, and I think that's fascinating, which is why when he does this hobby he's super invested in, sort of Josuke allows himself to get under JOBIN's skin and really learn some stuff about it, and I think that's what's so interesting about it. But what I really think emphasizes how JOBIN views the world is the way he views these beetle characters. And I know that sounds weird, but I'm going to just say that he views the beetles in a way that they are almost human itself. He describes them often as athletes in a gladiatorial kind of scenario, and he's basically like their coach or their manager, to put it in, you know, more professional terms. And what I think is so interesting about it is that JOBIN is able to manipulate them literally by kind of hyping them up, by having them kill an insect beforehand, but then genuinely manipulating them, which lets me segue right into his stand ability, Speed King. Now, Speed King has the ability to heat up some nerves inside of one's body that allow them to get really, really, you know, altered in a distinct way. For the beetles, he mentions that he heats them up for the 45-second rounds of this, but then they'll just die 20 minutes later. And that specific insight is what I find so fascinating. JOBIN is willing to kill for victory. That is the major point that I want to bring up for this arc. He's using things as just that. They're things to be used. You know what I mean? He doesn't view them with a specific sense of importance to him in any way whatsoever. And I think that's so fascinating about his character, because it really shows his priorities. And as we see his importance in the story become more prevalent later in the story, obviously, because of his connection to the rock humans, we can definitely tell that there's something brewing behind the surface of JOBIN along these lines, not just with beetles, but with humans, the rock humans, his subordinates. And I think it's really interesting because JOBIN is very negative to people who want to help him, while Josuke is very welcoming to people who want to help him. So I know I just rambled for a long time about just this introduction, but I think it really says a lot about his character, so I just wanted to emphasize that importance. And one other thing I didn't mention is his importance to the family itself. I didn't really focus on that much. He is, you know, the head of the fruit parlor, the heir to the entire family's wealth. He is the oldest sibling, so many of the other characters look up to him. He is Tsurugi's dad. He is Mitsuba's husband. Basically everything in the family is leading up to him being the next person, and especially because he's the only one with a child, I would say, is really, really evident. And Tsurugi is basically the entire goal of the story. It's breaking the curse of the rock disease, and seeing that JOBIN has a really, really, really strong motivation for doing the things he does, which is to save his son. We can tell that there's some clear motive behind what he does, and there's a reason why he views people as a means to an end, because his means to an end isn't just making the Higashikata fruit parlor better, it's also saving his son, because obviously that's his real goal. That's what I like about JOBIN a lot. He's able to really balance these moments of genuine emotion and just cold-heartedness and just genuine apathy for so many people. I find it incredibly compelling because he walks this line, which I would say is a lot of his character. He always walks the line between good and evil a lot because he's meant to be an ally, because we as the readers want to see Tsurugi get healed, because Tsurugi is a character we care about, because, you know, he's been really helpful to Josuke throughout the entirety of the story, and he's a child. Obviously we don't want to see this little child die, because that would be crazy. And JOBIN is using his notoriety, his wealth, to try everything he can to ensure Tsurugi can get healed, yet at the same time there's this sense that he's doing it the wrong way while Josuke is trying to do it the right way, which is, again, more contrast between the two characters that I really enjoy, because I feel as though JOBIN and Josuke's dynamic of how they view people, how they use people, and their motives in general for trying to ensure safety is, I think, very, very heavily contrasting with one another, because Josuke, he obviously wants to save people like Holly, but he wants to do it in the way where people who are using the Rokakaka negatively in order to make money and make people suffer for not being able to be saved get taken down, while JOBIN, on the other hand, doesn't really care about that. Since he's been born into this rich family, he's able to just easily access all this stuff, so he never really thinks about it in that regard. So he's just trying to use it in order to ensure Tsurugi's safe. But does he really care about other people? No. And to be fair, I don't think Josuke really cares about other people as well. I think Josuke just cares about Holly, but there's this idea behind Josuke's intention to save her that's, I think, is very different from JOBIN's, because Josuke also wants to take down the rock humans, who are JOBIN's allies, which again is another direct contrast with one another. Josuke's goals directly impact JOBIN's goals, which makes both of them literally antagonists in another story. They are roadblocks preventing both of their goals from being achieved. And that's what I think is so fascinating, that if Josuke makes progress, JOBIN loses progress. If JOBIN makes progress, Josuke loses progress. I think there's this great sense of bouncing back and forth between these two characters, because I feel as though JOBIN could have an entire arc focused on him and the rock humans, and that would have the ability to tell us everything we need to know about what's going on with Josuke's story. And as Josuke does many, many times, we can tell what's going on in JOBIN's story through Josuke's actions. I think it's really fascinating. Now, speaking of Josuke, obviously, there's one scene in particular I feel like I absolutely have to bring up to show just how much anticipation I had for JOBIN as a character, which was when he took out Yasuho. That was crazy when I was first reading that monthly. I remember I was like, oh my god, JOBIN's really gonna be the guy now. And it was just, that moment was so hype. And as the story continued onward and Yasuho got into more false deaths, it was a bit annoying, but seeing that JOBIN took the offensive to take out Yasuho and ensure that Josuke would not have her assistance for a bit of time definitely showed that JOBIN further emphasized that manipulative nature to him. He knows how to get under people's skin. He knows what's important to them, and he knows how to use that to make them suffer. And I think that's so fascinating, because Yasuho is someone that JOBIN knows and has known for a really, really long time. Like, I remember in that page he even says, I'm pretty sure this is my brother's girlfriend, because he has no clue. He doesn't really know who she is, but he knows of her. And she's even considered to be one of the family. Like, I remember they do a little photograph and she is invited in, like, oh Yasuho, why don't you come join in? And I think the fact that JOBIN just doesn't care is so cool. He knows what's important to him, and what's important to him is his family, but more specifically Mitsuba and Tsurugi, because they're his, family. Well, even his siblings, like, oh, you're my brother's girlfriend? Who cares? You're friends with that one guy who lost his memory? Who cares? It shows his priorities really well. And one thing I also wanted to point out was JOBIN's speech around, I know I'm skipping around quite a bit, but I just want to keep this thought train going. JOBIN's speech to Mitsuba about Tsurugi possibly being blamed for this attack at school, and he talks about his very gray nature. Like, he literally just spells it out. He doesn't say, I have a gray way of looking at things, but basically he does. He says good or evil, legal or illegal, bad or good, none of those matter. All that matters is strength or weakness, which is literally everything that's been highlighted since this Beatles thing. Because he's like, oh, the Beatles are stronger, but I could just manipulate them to be even stronger, and then they'll die, but I would have won by using them. Essentially, I think that JOBIN's entire mindset of strength versus weakness is incredibly interesting. Like, it's so interesting, and the fact his stand ability ties right into the idea of manipulating people, doing the same idea of altering one's own mindset or body in order to get what he wants. And my favorite thing is the fact that he can use this ability not just to control people, to harm them very, very subtly. For example, at the end of the Beetle fight, yes, we're all the way back to the Beetle fight, Josuke out of nowhere starts getting this massive nosebleed from JOBIN heating up one of the nerves around his nose and his face. And I think that's such a subtle way of showing dominance over Josuke. He's like, here, why don't you take this tissue? Take this tissue. And it's so intimidating, even though it looks so normal. The idea behind it is just so, the power dynamic itself. JOBIN always feels he has to be superior to other people, putting them in a place of weakness so he could show his usefulness. So they will rely on him, then he can use them later. Now, the last thing I want to bring up is the intentions that JOBIN had to team up with the Rock Humans to take out Josuke, because Josuke is halting progress of the Fruit Parlor. He is literally an antagonistic force in JOBIN's goal. So JOBIN's like, screw this guy, we're going to take him out. And what I think is so compelling is that JOBIN really shows he cares, not about the Rock Humans themselves, but about his ambition. And his drive. It's very equal to Josuke's ambition to find out who he is. JOBIN's ambition is to make sure his family is secure and safe, but he does it in such negative ways that damage other people that Josuke almost has this sort of, not righteous, because I wouldn't say righteous at all, but a more personal, distinct goal that feels more personal, you know? Obviously, there's more of a motivation to get behind with Josuke, with the I want to know who I am, amnesia kind of motive, instead of JOBIN, which is just I want to make sure my family is safe. But that's also not a bad goal, which is what I think is so compelling about it. Both these goals aren't like I want to take over the world, I want to, negative things. They're both really positive goals, self-discovery and safety. There's no negatives here. It's just the way they go about it. And JOBIN, there's one scene I remember specifically after Damo Tamaki is taken down by Josuke. JOBIN is seen bawling in his car. And I think it's so fascinating because he finally realizes, like, oh, Josuke is, he's really trying to screw me over. And I think it's just so interesting, And I don't know, like, there's just so many aspects of JOBIN I really, really like. Like, even though he's so intimidating, he's still this massive nerd. Like, I remember, I mentioned earlier that speech he gave about strength versus weakness. In that same scene, he's talking to his wife, Mitsuba, who was recently at that point brought back to the story, which I'll get into in just a bit, and she gets this rock nose as a result of messing around too much with equivalent exchange. And JOBIN's like, whoa, your nose is so cool. You're kind of like my beetle. Whoa. And then he tries to, like, you know, have some more intimate times with Mitsuba, like, whoa, we gotta do this. Poke me with your nose. And it's so weird. It's genuinely kind of like weird and uncomfortable, but it's hilarious at the same time. And there's always that sense of like childlike innocence in a way through this negative, horrible stuff he does. He's still like a child. And I think it's so fitting that his first arc is introduced in his every day is like summer vacation. He's very carefree. He tries to make sure life is as easygoing as possible. Kind of similar to Yoshikage Kira in a way. He just wants to live the nice life, but he's willing to do these negative things just to kind of ease it. JOBIN's motives for that, though, are obviously he has a business to run. He's kind of like a mafia boss in a way where he's like, oh, I have to do this to ensure safety, I'll do that. While Kira is more just a sicko for real. Now, I just wanted to highlight one last thing, which is why I thought JOBIN was going to be the main villain of the story. Obviously, JOBIN and Josuke have this antagonistic relationship with one another, which I've mentioned many times in this video at this point, but the main reason that I thought so was that Mitsuba was reintroduced into the story. Now, Mitsuba was always there from the start of the story. Tsurugi's mom, while JOBIN wasn't there, Mitsuba was there. Mitsuba then kind of just faded into the background, kind of like Kei, Kyo, Nijimura, and it felt as though they weren't really relevant into the story, but then they were brought back in, and I'm wondering, why would Araki bring these characters back in? It's kind of intriguing, and I realized that specifically with Mitsuba, there's a very strong relation to JOBIN, obviously, being his wife, and there's a very strong relation between Mitsuba getting hurt in the hospital with the rock humans to JOBIN, all of them linked together. And what I think is so interesting about this is the fact that Mitsuba was brought back into the story almost unceremoniously at all. It's like, oh yeah, you're her, it's you. You know, it felt as though we should have cared about her, but then she's like, oh, it's that person. You know what I mean? It felt very much of a dull kind of moment, but she got cooler and cooler as the story went on. She got a stand. She got all these great things happening to her, and I'm like, wow, you're getting a lot of development. I wonder why. Now, what I think would have been interesting, and what I assume the end of the story would have been, is that Tooru, we're talking about Tooru now, so, would have been a subordinate manipulated by JOBIN. And that's what I think would have been so fascinating, because Mitsuba has been shown to get really, really hurt by the head doctor on multiple occasions. And what I think is so fascinating is that JOBIN has shown, obviously, that he really cares about his family and is willing to do anything about it, yet Tooru, for some reason, keeps attacking the family in order to make sure they don't pursue this goal, because if they pursue this goal, then JOBIN will be found out. Now, I know this is a bit kind of hard to explain, I guess, but that's how I interpreted it, at least. So, if you have any thoughts on how JOBIN could have been incorporated as the main villain, let me know. I think it would be interesting to hear, because obviously I had a lot of expectations for this guy, so I'm curious what yours were as well. Now, because of this blend of childlike innocence, yet cruel sort of motives and apathy towards many people, there's a really strong contrast between his cold-heartedness and his endearing nature, which I find absolutely fascinating. I've been reading JoJo's for a really long time now, ever since I was in high school, so like 5+ years, and JOBIN has definitely risen to the top 10 JoJo characters of mine, and I'm not going to tell you the rest, because that might be a video later on, but just letting you know, JOBIN is a character I really, really liked, basically from his introduction to his end, and I thought it was really, really cool.
Since the videos are getting a bit newer, obviously I'm not going to have as much to think back on when it comes to these opinions, but there's some things I'd like to say for this JOBIN video pretty much immediately, which is that JOBIN is no longer my favorite character in Part 8, I'd say that Josuke or Yasuho is probably my favorite character. But I do love JOBIN a lot. I think he's super in-depth, hilarious, and a great threat, as I mentioned in the video. But with that out of the way, I mean, that's really it. I think all my points on JOBIN are pretty great. I still think he should have been the main villain with the amount of build-up that Araki had given him throughout the entire part, and the thematic connection between Josuke and JOBIN that I at least saw. So, I'm curious, what do you guys think about JOBIN possibly being the main villain? Did you guys think that as well? Or for people who have newly finished the part, did you think JOBIN would have been more important, or did you already know that Tooru was the main villain? I don't really know how the part is going to be perceived now that we know that Tooru is a thing in the fandom, so I'm curious what you think down below. And with that, let's get into probably a personal favorite of the videos that I've made on this, besides the Tooru one being an absolute mess, and it is probably my favorite for the communication that it caused in the fandom, but the Yasuho video. This is personally the video I am the most proud of, and it's something I worked really hard on, so I hope you enjoy.
This video gets kind of real. I didn't expect it to become as serious of a video as this, but I felt like I needed to bring up a specific plot point in JoJolion to really delve into Yasuho's character. Just so you know in advance, I'll be discussing themes of suicide in this video. Part 8 starts really similarly to Part 4. We're introduced to this person with seemingly no relation to the plot, but they cross paths with the main JoJo of the part and become never-endingly intertwined with their narrative. But obviously, these people being Yasuho and Koichi, and through their interactions with the Joestars and their family, they grow immensely as people. However, Yasuho's connection to Josuke is much more integral to his growth compared to Koichi's with his Josuke. Yasuho's importance cannot be understated because of her role as Josuke's guiding light and as Josuke's essentially first person he ever meets for his new life. She is essentially his everything for a really long period of time as he tries to figure out who he is. Araki knows this and really closely ties Josuke and Yasuho together throughout this narrative, and he does so really well by giving them really meaningful interactions, more than just actual plot significant stuff, but it shows how much they really do care about each other and just act normal with each other, which I think is something that's very, very hard to come by in JoJo's. Now, I assume if you're watching this video from my channel, you've most likely seen my Tooru video, and in that, and also in my Part 8 ending video, I talk a lot about Araki constantly putting these false death flags on her. It was pretty annoying, not gonna lie, and as someone who reads One Piece, I definitely know false death flags can be really annoying. So having her constantly be used for dramatic tension when evidently I knew that she wouldn't die was pretty annoying, but overall I still really enjoy her as a character, and there's a lot of aspects to her that I feel definitely could have been developed further, but overall, again, I feel like she was definitely one of the best characters to come from Part 8. Now, you might mention that I said earlier that Yasuho is meant to be sort of a guide, someone who leads Josuke to having this realization of who he is, while also being this beacon of hope for us and him and the world of JoJolion, being one of the most innocent and optimistic people in the series. And I think this is very, very noticeable in her stand ability, Paisley Park, which is literally meant to be sort of a guiding thing. It literally looks like a GPS map, and it is meant to show the truth and information from people that we normally wouldn't be able to receive. And something that is obviously meant to represent finding out the truth will always be put in danger. Yasuho is not an offensive type stand at all. She is a very support focused person, and unfortunately, because of this, she's always put in danger. From people like JOBIN and the rock humans, she is seen as a really big threat, and
someone who can lure Josuke, which unfortunately puts her in this position where she has to be seen as a damsel in distress sort of figure to a lot of people in the community, and it sucks. It really sucks, because I wish that she had the capability to do more, to not be in these situations, to not just have these hanging threads waving around all the time like, oh, is Yasuo gonna die this time? No, because the truth can't die. The truth can be submerged as much as possible, but it's never going to die, because eventually the truth is gonna come out with help from people like Josuke, who can afford to let it come out. Now, it's gonna get kind of real. This chapter was one that really deeply affected me when I read it, and it showed a flashback with Yasuo talking about a pin that she found, and this pin, this rock animal pin, well, rock insect, rock animal, whatever, this pin caused her to just start going crazy and just lose all hope, even to the point where she literally tried to kill herself. And it was pretty crazy, I'm not gonna lie. Reading that was very, very negative for me. I felt as though literally the day I read that, I was just drained immediately, because I didn't want to read it. You know what I mean? I did not think that would ever be brought up for a main character that I actually cared about. You know what I mean? So that sucked. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Yasuo isn't meant to be this beacon of sadness and isolation and loneliness. She's always such a happy and positive character, and it's really honestly great to see. After learning that, retrospectively looking back on everything Yasuo's done, how she's just this constant delight every time she's on screen and having just nice interactions with Josuke. One that really sticks out to my mind is how just naive and innocent she seems to be still, and it genuinely gives me a lot of optimism, you know, seeing her try to lick her elbow and then be really, really happy that she was able to do such a thing, having her be able to just enjoy this really nice food with Josuke in the ski lift that Mamazuku lives on. I feel like these moments get lost through Josuke's journey to find himself. Even though Yasuo is always there trying to keep things lighthearted, the latter half of the story is very action focused and doesn't really give Yasuo and Josuke those meaningful moments that they had earlier on in the part, because they are separate from each other for such a long time, which I think is a bit of a shame, because their moments that they were together really gave the part a really uplifting feeling. The story starts out with Yasuo leading Josuke to kind of try and find out who he is, and at the end he is able to kind of make a new identity, and she leaves happy, and she has literally been this beacon of optimism and hope for Josuke, and seeing her come from such a place of despair makes it feel all the more powerful, in my opinion. So, a bit of a harsh topic, I know, but I did really want to discuss this part, because this was definitely maybe the part of Yasuo that I really felt affected me the most and made her character really, really change in my mind. At first, she was just kind of bubbly, airheaded, you know, the usual kind of trope. But after seeing this and realizing that she's gone through a lot of pain and just suffering, and honestly, she still kind of does, with her family and her mom especially being a drunk who leaves her alone a lot of the time, the fact she's still able to find this optimism and a family and people who care about her and people that just make her happy to be herself is really great. So I just really wanted to talk about this in particular.
overall, I just really wanted to make this video because I think Yasuho is a really great character from JoJolion, but she doesn't really get that level of analysis or sort of enthusiasm I've seen in the JoJo's fandom compared to other characters. Now, obviously this is due to a lot of people just not reading JoJolion yet because it's not an anime, and a lot of the hype in JoJo's at the moment is still focused on part 6, which is about to have an anime starting, I'm pretty sure, a month from now or 2 months from now. So that is pretty exciting stuff, and people just sort of theorizing part 9 now that part 8 has ended. But I still wanted to put this video out because there's a lot about part 8 that I still think is really great to look back on and sort of think about more, because it's just having this series that I've read for such a long time. I like looking back on things and really thinking about how those things affected the way I read the story, or maybe how my thoughts on those things have changed after reading the story or rereading it, stuff along those lines. So I just really wanted to give Yasuho that sort of similar treatment. I know a lot of people are speculating on part 9, since it seems as though it might be a direct continuation from JoJolion, with many characters that we've seen in this world being brought back for the next part, and I still don't really know how I feel about that, I'm not gonna lie. There's been a lot of foreshadowing for stuff like, oh, they said lands a ton of times in JoJolion for the Rokakaka, the lands where it's from, JoJoLands. But again, I'm still not really sure if that's going to be the case. However, if it is the case, I would definitely love to see Yasuho have her story continue. I want to see what she does now that she's accomplished this goal of helping Josuke. I want to know how she is going to continue moving forward, and a bunch of other characters obviously, but Yasuho is definitely a character I want to see more of in the future. I struggled for quite a bit thinking about Yasuho because I wanted to just talk about her just having all these fake death flags, and I'm just like, that's really disingenuous because that's not her character. That's a thing of her character, but that's not her character. You know what I mean? I feel as though that with this video I finally got what I wanted from this video. I really got why I like Yasuho, not why I dislike her writing, because I don't just want to dismiss a character's writing the whole time because apparently I did that with Tooru. But I don't know, my points were still valid, I would say, but whatever. But for this Yasuho video, I really just wanted to get the points across that I enjoy this character. I think she's really, really cool, and even though I think the false death flags were kind of a short end of the stick, I focused more on the positives, which is her really great personality, her really unique fighting style and support, and her flashback, and how that literally caused me to reinterpret her entire character. So I just wanted to highlight those things real quick because she's a great character, and I feel as though people don't give her the shine that she deserves because of characters like Tooru, Josuke, Mamazuku, who are just more popular in the fandom. Obviously, Yasuho is a massive character, but you know what I mean. I don't see as many videos about her as I see about those three. If I'm being fully honest, this video, me sort of really looking into her character and kind of realizing there's a lot there that people don't talk about, and a lot there that really affected me when I was reading it. Yasuho might be one of my favorite JoJo characters as a whole. I just really didn't expect it, you know what I mean? She's always just positive and fun to have on the page, and she actually has like a really gripping narrative to her.
As I said at the beginning of the first video in this entire JoJolion sort of compilation, anthology, saga, this is the first series that I ever got super into. As you can see from all those books over there, JoJo's is a series I truly, truly care about. And it was the first series I was really invested in. It's basically what got me into anime in general, manga in general, because I just thought it was so creative, fun, and interesting. and JoJolion was the first part I read as a part of the fandom, seeing the chapters come out monthly and seeing the story evolve instead of me just being able to binge it all at once, or to whatever rate that I wanted to binge it at. When I wasn't watching the anime, I could just speed through it with the scans that were pretty crusty at the time, but luckily JoJolion had a pretty good translation team, so that was great to see. But now that the part is over and JoJoLands is right along the way, what do I think about this part that helped shape my JoJo experience altogether? Although I would probably say JoJolion is in the lower half of the JoJo parts in my opinion, I think it's great. I really enjoy a lot of the characters. I think that the stands are really cool. A lot of the fights are pretty interesting, although it does get kind of samey with the long range automatic stand formula Araki was really fixated on during this part. And although I do not like Tooru very much whatsoever as a villain, I think that a lot of the stuff in the part, especially the themes that Araki tries to push with Josuke, were really well done. Rereading the early sections of the story especially made me realize how much I actually cared about each of the HIGASHIKATA family members, like Hato, Daya, and Joshu of course, you know, him being an absolute legend not only in the beginning as a antagonistic force, but turning into a still antagonistic force, but in a really like tragic way. I think he's really interesting too. I did want to make a Joshu video, but I never got around to it because my old computer got really like scuffed around the time. But I might do that still, honestly. Joshu's a really interesting character. I feel like there's no other character Araki has ever written that's like Joshu. So let me know if you want a Joshu video, and I'll probably do it, I'm not gonna lie. I also think Hirose is a really enjoyable character. Tsurugi is obviously a great character in my opinion. And although I did want a bit more from Kato, I felt like her role at the end of the story was good. Again, a bit out of nowhere for Araki, you know, same with the spin. And there's some stuff that I just, you know, people like, but I just genuinely don't because I feel like it's out of nowhere. We can't all just like everything, you know? But JoJolion is good. Rereading it made me see how many characters are just amazing. And obviously, I love Josefumi, I love Kira, love Carrera, I love all these amazing flashback characters, especially Damo, who I cannot shut up about in like any JoJo video seemingly. But just know, there's so many characters in this part that are really great, and then around the midpoint is where Araki starts to lose me, which is ironic because it introduces Mamazuku, who I think is absolutely amazing. Maybe it had something to do with the literal Lego White House stand that really rubbed me the wrong way. JoJolion focused immensely on the themes of self-discovery and your own identity, so if any of these characters actually managed to show up again in JoJoLands, I think he would be able to really develop on that theme even more, seeing how the characters grow and change. That might even be the theme of JoJoLands, some sort of growth and development in the story as our characters acquire more and more, which seems to be the main theme and goal of our character in that part. So I'm really excited to see if any of these characters return to the story, become someone I care about even more, hopefully Josuke or Yasuho, and unfortunately not JOBIN, but I'm super excited to see where things go. And with that, hopefully you enjoyed any of these videos. These were obviously a huge part of my YouTube channel's growth. I really enjoyed making them when I was there in the time, and although some of them are crusty to say the least, I feel as though highlighting and archiving these videos is especially important in times where the fandom is going through rapid changes and developments, because as shocking as it might seem, JoJoLands is only less than 2 weeks away. The whole new part of JoJo, a whole new saga that we're going to enter that might last a decade just like JoJolion did, and I can't wait to dive right into it with each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this or want to see me go through my JoJoLands journey, consider supporting the channel, and with that, take care and have a good one.